Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and some lovely, soothing merch to make your days and nights sweeter. Let me take you somewhere soft and relaxing, my friend. How does that sound? Taking a break from the world and reality might not magically fix everything, but it might make you more able to focus, to cope, to feel, and to thrive. So we'll step into the village of nothing much, where kindness is commonplace, safety is assured, and enjoyment is abundant. If you need help at bedtime, I tell these same stories in a more soporific voice on the show called Nothing Much Happens. And if you like hearing about the behind-the-scenes aspects of writing and creating as a podcaster, stick around at the end of the show, and I'll chat about that for a bit. Now, because it's a good way to start, let's take a deep inhale through your nose and sigh from your mouth. Nice. Do it again. Breathe in and let it out. Good. Our stories today tip us into the first holiday tales of the season. We'll start with Rainy Morning, a story about a good day to stay in bed and finish a book, as well as looking forward to the next on the to-be-read list once the rain starts to shift to snow. Then we'll visit with friends, step out into the fresh air, and risk a fall or two in skating in the park. Finally, we'll pop some popcorn and snuggle on the couch as the special begins to play on the TV in Paper Stars. Rainy morning. I was staying in bed this morning to finish the last chapters. In fact, I tried to stay up last night, but the book kept slipping out of my hands, and the third time it hit me on the forehead, it was suggested that I give up the ghost and turn out the light. I had slept deep with long, vivid dreams in which my brain tried several times to finish the story I'd been reading. Have you ever noticed that dreams can seem sensible, reasonable, and important in the gaps of wakefulness that come during the night, then fall apart like a piece of tissue paper in water soon after you wake? Sometimes I've held on to an idea all night, feeling that it was vital to remember, only to say it out loud in the light of day and hear how confused its logic was. Dreams must be of a different world, one we understand without explanation when we're in it, but fall out of sync with when we're not. So this morning, my dreams having missed the mark of my yet unfinished novel, I decided to stay in bed and read to the last page. Well, first I needed a cup of coffee, so I pulled a sweater around me and headed down to the kitchen. At the bottom of the stairs, I stepped up to the window and watched a steady rain coming down. Nearly all the trees were empty now, and we'd finished raking and tidying the yard for the winter a week or two ago. The azaleas and rhododendrons were wrapped in burlap and looked a bit like tiny evergreens swathed in snow. I had a feeling that snow was just a few days away. This rain was likely the last one we'd see till spring. In the kitchen, I took my favorite cup down from the shelf, and as I was pouring coffee, got a kiss goodbye. I heard the door close, and the house was quiet. What a treat. Empty house, rainy day, reading my book in bed. I carried my cup back up and slid into the still warm sheets, plumping my pillows and getting as comfortable as possible. It was dark, and before I switched on my light, I just sipped from my cup and let my eyes adjust. I reached for my book and flipped through the pages. I'd stuck in my bookmark as I was falling asleep the night before, but I'd read a few pages in that sort of zombie daze that happens when you push your eyes forward through the text but don't absorb any of it. It's silly to be stubborn in those moments, to persist in reading when sleep is knocking on your door, at least in my experience. When my blinks get longer and longer, there is no going back. Still, I fight it sometimes like a child asking for one more glass of water before bed. I found a paragraph that looked reasonably familiar, and tucking my coffee cup under my chin, began to read. The pages flew by. At some point, I got up and refilled my cup. The rain continued to fall, and I wondered as I passed by the window again if it would become an icy drizzle. If, as it was hitting the windshields of passing cars, it was landing as brief and blurry flakes before the wipers washed them away. Back in bed again, I had just a chapter left. Then I was a bit sad to see it go. Every once in a while, you get to the end of a book and grieve that you will never be able to read it for the first time again. And this was that sort of book. Still, I had a few more pages, and I tried to savor them, though sometimes caught my eyes jumping ahead, rushing past a passage full of description and straight to spoken words. This book had a mystery, but was more than that. It was a tapestry of narratives, woven together expertly, and in a way that left me trying to tie the loose ends together, but knowing and rather liking that I was still missing something. Something that came back to shock me in the last chapter. It was a thrill, and in the end, completely satisfying. And when I finished the last page, closed the book with a sigh. Well done, I thought. I laid the book back on my table and set my empty cup down beside it. The rain still came down, and I clicked off the light and closed my eyes for a few minutes. Not quite sleeping, but dozing between worlds, thinking of the characters I would miss now that I was done. I imagined them, the way they would walk, the sound of their voices, where they might go in the days after their story had finished. When I opened my eyes again, the light had changed in the room. The rain had stopped, and while the clouds were still thick in the sky, the dark gloom had given over to a brighter, optimistic gray. I looked over at my finished book and remembered excitedly that I had book club in a few hours. I'd signed up at the beginning of the year after seeing a flyer downtown. It had been one of those things I'd long wondered if I would enjoy, and realized that I wasn't likely to find out unless I tried. It turned out that I loved it. We met in the back room of the bookshop on the first and third Wednesday of every month, and alternated between classics, cozy mysteries, and biographies. The bookshop owner hosted us graciously with pots of tea, and we took turns bringing snacks. Fresh fruit, toasted nuts, scones, and muffins. She also helped us set a few discussion questions to get the wheels turning each time, and gave us her recommendations of new books that had just come out and overlooked ones that deserved more attention. We would be voting tonight on our next read, and I'd been researching a bit about the options that were currently suggested. It was time for a biography, and there wasn't a weak candidate among them. One was the story of a man who'd ventured into the Arctic, documenting various phenomena that had never been seen before, and lived long after to see his work lead to many discoveries. Another was the story of a royal family whose dynasty had been full of fascinating twists and turns, and the aftermath that continued for centuries. The last option, and the one that had my vote, was written by a famous and beloved author, who wrote the story of an important man that had nearly been forgotten. When she couldn't find a publisher to print her book, it had been locked away for 80 years and was just now finally being shared. I thought that whether or not my pick won the vote, I'd be adding that book to my stack and diving in as the winter set in. Just a few more minutes in bed first. Then I'd get up and start the day. Skating in the park. The day had started clear and bright, and I'd watched the dawn from an upstairs window, where I'd tucked into a window seat with a cup of hot coffee and an old patchwork quilt pulled around me. I loved this little corner of the house. There was a long hallway with doors leading off to bedrooms and baths, and at one end it turned a slight corner, and there, under a broad window, was a nook built into the wall, which was perfect for reading or sitting with a cat in your lap, or like today, watching the dawn come. As I watched, I thought of how Homer had described the dawn again and again in the Iliad and the Odyssey. He'd said that dawn had worked her rosy fingers across the sky. I put my chin in my hand and tapped my fingers against my cheek, thinking that the dawn he had watched and the one that was happening right now in front of me a few thousand years later were sisters. The rosy fingers were still working their way across the sky. The light was spreading. The pink turned softer and paler till the sky was her usual blue self. I took the last sip from my cup, and with my quilt still wrapped around me, padded down the hall into my room. Though the sun was out, the day would be cold, and I'd need to bundle up as I had plans to spend a good deal of it outside. I chose my thickest socks and took a fuzzy sweater, a Hanukkah gift I'd gotten the night before, from my drawer, and when I was sufficiently layered, slipped down into the kitchen. I filled a thermos with the rest of the coffee and slid it into my bag. I was zipping up my coat and pulling on my boots when I heard a quick, friendly honk from the front drive. I slung my bag over my shoulder and skipped out the front door. The skating rink in the park by the library was ready and open, and that was our destination today. This was a yearly tradition with a rotating group of friends. We'd started it when we were kids, and now some of us had kids, and some of us just acted like them. I buckled into the last seat in the car, and we trundled off down the street. My friends had 2 little ones, and they were buzzing with excitement.
We're going skating,
they chorused together. We are, I sang back. We looked out the windows together, pointing out houses decked for the holidays and cars with freshly cut trees tied to their roofs. When we slid into a spot near the park and unbuckled the kids from their seats, a little hand reached out to grab for mine. We squeezed through our mittens and smiled and let the sun warm our faces. Ready? I asked.
Ready.
We met a few more friends at the edge of the rink, and soon we were tying on skates and fumbling out onto the ice. Those first few turns around the rink were always the slipperiest. My body knew how to do this, a bit, but it took a while for it to remember. There were a few spills and collisions, but then I started to find a rhythm, feeling the ice slicing under my skates, the shift and catch of my legs and belly muscles. In the cold December air, my body was warming up. I spotted a friend taking a wobbly baby step by the railing, and I took their hand to ease them out into the open space. We laughed together as they squealed and held on for dear life. Then slowly they started to find their way, pushing into one foot and then into the other. I stopped to rest for a bit, sitting on a bench by the edge of the rink, and one of the little ones spotted me and climbed up onto my lap. We watched the skaters, some timid and some sure-footed. There was a couple skating together who must have done this for years. They glided past the others, steps in sync, one turning in the arms of the other, skating backwards like a slow dance in a ballroom. I watched their faces as they skated past us. They were serene. This thing they were doing, which seemed to me as impossible as flying, was to them as natural as walking. I reminded myself that hours and hours must have gone into their dance, and marveled. We can do amazing things when we practice them again and again. We all took one more turn around the ice, then agreed it was time for a meal someplace warm. There was a pizzeria on the edge of the park, with long wooden tables where we could all sit together. Their windows were ringed with lights, twisted around garlands of ivy and pine boughs, and they were steamed up against the cold outside. We were hungry from the fresh air and exercise, and ordered more than we could possibly eat, pizzas and salads and baskets of breadsticks. They made their pizza in a tall oven built into the wall, and the kids watched as they stoked it with wood and slid pizzas in on long-handled peels. The pizzas came out with thin crusts, crunchy with a dusting of semolina, bubbled up in places and just slightly scorched on their bottoms. Everyone ate and laughed and talked, sharing pieces from one plate to another. Once the kids were full, they picked a friendly lap, climbed up to lay their head against a sweater-covered chest, and dozed while the grown-ups chatted. Whatever we tried, life stayed busy, and as we got older, the years seemed to go faster. So these were the moments we counted on for tying the strands of our friendships tighter. It was a tradition we would all honor, this day of wobbling out onto the ice to call on the muscle memory of skating and sliding and being together. Years could pass, months without much time to connect, but we would always do this. Paper stars. You know when you haven't put together a puzzle in ages? And then on some rainy day you pull one out and suddenly you are puzzle obsessed? It's all you want to do, to be allowed to keep picking up the pieces, turning them this way and that, looking at the picture on the box, until with a satisfied sigh you can pop a piece right into place. Or knitting. You have an unfinished blanket from last year, one you just ran out of steam on 2/3 of the way through, but you get a new skein of yarn or a new pattern to follow, and suddenly you're trying to knit between bites of dinner. A couple of Christmases ago, I was gifted a book of crossword puzzles, and I went crossword mad till each one was filled in. I don't know why those little bursts of enthusiasm come and go, but I'm determined to enjoy them while they're here. And right now, I am happily consumed with making tiny paper stars. I'd bought a little pack of strips of pretty paper, and with it a booklet from the bookshop downtown. On the front of the pack, it said, "Make 1,000 stars." And at this point, I thought I might be about halfway there. I'd always loved watching people fold origami shapes. It seemed quite meditative and restful as well as beautiful, but I'd never been able to get my hands to follow along with the instructions. The stars promised to be good for beginners, so I'd taken them home and sat at my kitchen table, following along with the picture guide and the booklet. The first dozen or so had been pretty rough. The finished stars were meant to be rounded, almost as if they were puffed full of air, but mine were decidedly flat. With each one I attempted, I learned a tiny bit more. Don't crease the paper, just wrap it, I realized. Then the shape will be rounder. Take time with the first steps, and the end product will be more polished. Soon I was producing recognizable stars, and my fingers were more familiar with the movements. And that puzzle effect, the knitting effect or whatever we should call it, it kicked in. I'd made a couple dozen stars, but now all I wanted to do was make more. There was something both satisfying and comforting in the process. The steps became like a ritual, and when I finished each one and saw that it had come out well, it was like the fulfilling end of a chapter, the resolving notes of a chorus. My pile of stars grew until I had to sweep them into a mixing bowl to keep them from falling on the floor. I made them in different shades and in slightly different sizes, though none was bigger around than a quarter. The paper had a lovely feel in my hands, smooth and sturdy in a couple dozen colors and designs. There were solid primary colors, a range of pastels and glimmering metallic shades, then a dozen or so with tiny gentle designs on them. One of my favorites was of the night sky. At the bottom of the paper strip were people standing on a patch of grass, gazing up. Above them, the sky started in bright hues of orange and pink, then faded to pale purple, and at the far end of the strip, bright stars shone in midnight blue. This little piece of paper felt like a story, and when I folded it, I thought of sunsets I'd seen in other seasons of my life. Tonight was a particularly good evening for making stars. It was bitterly cold outside, and my fireplace was roaring away. I was in my softest pajamas and my slippers, and there was an honest-to-goodness Christmas special on TV. It was one I'd been watching since I was little, when you'd have to mark it down on your calendar or you'd miss it. And though now I could watch it anytime I wanted to, the TV special experience was nostalgic and sweet for me. So I'd popped a big bowl of popcorn and cut up an apple and poured myself a tall glass of mineral water. My Christmas tree was lit up in the corner, and from my window I could see the glow of downtown. I settled myself on the sofa with my snack and my drink, a big warm blanket and a fresh stack of star paper. I didn't need a flat surface to make them. It had become a nearly automatic movement by now, each one taking less than a minute and coming out nigh on identically to the one before. I had a big gift bag beside me that I dropped each finished star into, now that I had outgrown my mixing bowl. As I was on my third or fourth, the special presentation music started to play on the TV. A spinning, flashing logo swirled on in bright Technicolor, just like it had when I was little. I watched with a smile on my face as I made stars. I could have said each word along with the characters on the screen. I knew every beat of the music that went along with the scenes. The skittering piano in the ice skating scene that sounded like snowflakes falling. The searchlights and the sad tree that needed someone to care. The happy ending with the upturned faces as they sang the closing carol. To my great delight, it was a double feature, and as I came back from refilling my glass, I realized we were in the North Pole with a snowman to tell us a story. I may have sniffed at the screen a bit. If those other reindeer didn't appreciate him as he was, they didn't deserve him. And there is nothing wrong with being a misfit. Beside me, my gift bag was nearly full of stars. I hadn't had any plans for all of these little creations. It was enough for me that I enjoyed the process of making them, but as I looked at them, I wondered if I could string them up with thread, a bit like I used to do with popcorn and cranberries. I could make garlands for my tree and many others. What pretty ornaments they would make. And with the sturdy paper, they should last for a few years at least. I had a feeling a fresh wave of project fever was about to wash over me, and would have all my gift-giving sorted out as well. I reached for another slip of paper, a few more stars first. Oh, these were some cozy stories to revisit. The first one we heard, Rainy Morning, was a bonus episode and only appeared on our Premium Plus feed. You should really subscribe. It literally only costs $0.10 a day, and it makes this show possible. The link is in our notes. Lots of folks asked me to name the books mentioned in this story, and just like when I'm asked for recipes of the food I mention, I have to disappoint because they're all made up. Funnily, even as I was reading it though, I thought, are these based on anything? Because they sound really good. But I think I was just dreaming about the kind of books I'd like to find. In the second story, we heard about a day skating in the park, and I suspect that this narrator is in the same friend group as the narrator of the story called Bustle in the City from episode 1 of this show, which just replayed last week. Not the same person, but in the same group, and that they have these holiday traditions to catch up. I'm not personally a skater, but I do enjoy seeing the local rinks go up in the winter here in Michigan, and I'm inspired by the people who do things like skate and dance, things that combine athleticism and artistry. Now, I am happily child-free and don't have biological nibblings, but I do have young people that I care a lot about, the children of my friends. And I got a little misty reading this episode, which I first wrote years ago, because those little ones, the ones I thought of when I was writing this, who I would have happily held in my lap at the pizza place, they are in high school and college, becoming, I am proud to say, amazing young adults. Ah, time, making fools of us all. Finally, in Paper Stars, we heard another bonus episode from the premium feed, and one that is highly personal. I do tend to get struck by those bursts of creative energy and get totally consumed with something like making stars or crocheting or crosswords. To me, bliss is having some little task to do while listening to a story or watching a movie. And usually it's listening. Oh God, did I make this show for myself? Just kidding. I already know I did. But I'm glad you're here too. If making paper stars sounds fun to you, just give it a quick Google. You can buy the paper for not much at all and watch a minute-long video on how to do it, and you'll be absorbed in your new favorite hobby in no time. And this is the perfect time for it. Just reading this today, I can already tell that before bed tonight, I'll be listening to an audiobook and folding stars, just like the wild and crazy girl I am. Thanks for spending this time with me today. I know the world is uncertain, and times for lots of us are scary and hard, and I'm really grateful to create a little pocket universe for us to relax into together. So thanks for listening and sharing this with anyone you know who could use a little calm break. I wish you a week of excellent books, meals with friends, and quiet crafting by the twinkle lights.